In the weeks that followed the incident at Cherry Hill Park, the community transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. The story spread quickly through local news and social media, touching hearts and changing minds far beyond the park's boundaries. Mr. Cole faced serious consequences for his actions. During the court proceedings, he sat quietly as witness after witness described what they'd seen that day. The teenage basketball player's videos proved crucial evidence, showing the clear, unprovoked nature of the attack. The judge's verdict was firm. Mr. Cole would serve time for assault on a minor with hate crime enhancements. But the real story wasn't about punishment, it was about healing and growth. Maya, showing wisdom beyond her years, asked to speak at local schools about her experience. Standing before audiences of children and adults alike, she shared her story with remarkable courage. "I was scared that day," she would tell them, her voice clear and strong. "But I wasn't alone. Everyone in the park became my family in that moment. They showed me that for every person who wants to hurt, there are many more who want to help." The police chief used the incident to launch a community outreach program. Police officers began hosting monthly picnics in the park, breaking down barriers between law enforcement and the community. Children played basketball with the same officers who had responded that day, while parents shared stories and built connections. Lily and Maya's friendship grew stronger through the experience. They started a school club called Friends Without Fences, encouraging students to learn about different cultures and celebrate their differences. Their simple idea spread to other schools in the district, creating a wave of positive change. The two teenage basketball players who had helped protect Maya were honored at a city council meeting. They spoke about the importance of standing up against injustice, inspiring other young people to be active participants in building a better community. Their quick thinking in recording the incident had not only helped justice be served, but had also created a powerful teaching tool about the consequences of hate. Maya's aunt became a regular speaker at community events, sharing her perspective on the importance of being an active bystander. "When you see wrong being done," she would say, "your silence is a choice." That day in the park, nobody chose silence. That's why hate didn't win. The park itself became a symbol of community strength. Local artists worked with children to create a colorful mural on a wall near the playground. The mural showed diverse hands joined together with the words "Hatred dims, but community glows" painted in bright letters. Maya and Lily's handprints were among the first added to the project. One sunny afternoon, exactly 1 month after the incident, the police chief watched from a bench as Maya played on the swings again. This time, the park was more crowded than ever, filled with families who had consciously chosen to reclaim this space as a place of joy and unity. The ice cream vendor, who had rushed to help that day, now gave out free ice cream every Saturday, calling it Unity Sunday. Children of all backgrounds lined up together, their laughter mixing with the cheerful tinkling of his bell, drowning out any memories of that dark day. In an unexpected turn of events, Mr. Cole's adult daughter reached out to Maya's family. She came to one of the community picnics, tears in her eyes as she apologized for her father's actions. Maya, showing the kind of forgiveness that only children seem capable of, simply offered her a hug and an ice cream cone. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 months later. The headline read, "From Darkness to Light: How One Community Turned Hate into Hope." The article featured a photo of Maya and Lily on the swings, their smiles bright against the backdrop of the new mural. Maya still visited her favorite park every weekend, but now she had an even bigger reason to smile. She wasn't just the police chief's daughter anymore, she had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can bring out the best in people. The story of that day became part of the community's fabric, told and retold not to keep anger alive, but to remind everyone that when faced with hatred, love and unity are always the stronger choice. And in Cherry Hill Park, where children of all backgrounds played together under the watchful eyes of a caring community, that lesson lived on every single day. The black SUV parked beside the line of patrol cars, its engine cutting off with a quiet purr. The police chief stepped out, his uniform crisp and his badge catching the sunlight. His face was a mask of controlled emotion as he surveyed the scene before him. Officers snapped to attention, their expressions showing a mix of respect and anticipation. The crowd fell silent, watching as their police chief walked purposefully toward the playground. He moved with the quiet authority of someone used to handling crisis situations, but there was something different in his stride today, something personal. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found what he was looking for, his daughter. "Daddy." Maya's voice broke through the silence. She tried to run to him, but the paramedic gently kept her seated, still checking her vital signs. The chief's steps quickened, though he maintained his professional demeanor. The crowd parted automatically, creating a path between father and daughter. When he reached Maya, he knelt down beside her, gently touching the red mark on her cheek. For a moment, the chief's professional mask slipped, revealing the pain of a father seeing his child hurt. He whispered something to her that made her smile through her tears, then stood up, his expression hardening as he turned toward where Mr. Cole was being held. Mr. Cole's face drained of color as realization dawned. His mouth opened and closed without making a sound as he watched the police chief approach. The officers holding him noticed his sudden change in demeanor, the way his defiant posture crumbled into something approaching terror. That's your daughter?" Mr. Cole finally managed to stammer, his voice barely above a whisper. The chief didn't respond immediately, instead turning to Officer Chen for a preliminary report. The gathering crowd watched in tense silence as the officer detailed the incident. The chief listened to the report with professional attention, his face revealing nothing. But those who knew him could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he controlled his breathing. When Officer Chen finished speaking, the chief turned to face Mr. Cole directly. "Sir," the chief's voice was steady, carrying across the now silent park. "You chose to assault a child today. The fact that she's my daughter doesn't change the severity of your crime. It would be just as serious if she were anyone else's child." His words carried the weight of both law and moral authority. Mr. Cole seemed to shrink with each word, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I didn't know," he began, but the chief cut him off with a raised hand. "You didn't know she was my daughter, and that's exactly the point," the chief continued, his voice level but intense. "You saw a little girl with dark skin and decided she deserved your hatred. That's not just sad, it's criminal." The crowd murmured in agreement. Parents held their children closer, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. The teenage basketball players who had helped protect Maya nodded solemnly, their phones still recording this moment of justice. Lily broke away from her mother and ran to Maya, holding her friend's hand as they watched the scene unfold. The chief glanced at their joined hands, one brown, one white, and a small smile crossed his face, as if their friendship represented everything that Mr. Cole's hatred stood against. "Officers," the chief addressed his team, his voice completely professional once more, "please proceed with the arrest. The full weight of the law will apply here, including hate crime enhancements." He turned to the gathering of witnesses. "Thank you all for protecting my daughter and for standing up against hatred. This is what community looks like." Mr. Cole was led to a patrol car, his head bowed in shame. The chief watched him go, then turned back to his daughter. In that moment, he wasn't the city's top law enforcement officer, he was simply a father comforting his child, showing that love would always be stronger than hate. The crowd began to disperse, but something had changed in the park that day. Parents spoke quietly to their children about what they'd witnessed, not just the hatred, but more importantly, the way the community had come together to stand against it. The chief's final words seemed to echo across the playground. This is what community looks like. The first police car arrived with lights flashing, casting red and blue shadows across the playground equipment. Officer Chen stepped out, quickly assessing the scene before him. The crowd parted slightly, creating a path while maintaining their protective circle around Maya and her aunt. "He's right there," several voices called out, pointing toward Mr. Cole, who had finally stopped pacing and now stood with his arms crossed, trying to maintain his look of defiance. The officer's hand instinctively moved to rest on his radio as he took in the situation, the crying child, the angry crowd, and the man who had caused it all. 2 more patrol cars pulled up within seconds, their sirens cutting off but lights still spinning. The arriving officers moved with practiced efficiency, spreading out to secure the scene. One officer, seeing Maya's tear-stained face, immediately called for paramedics to check on her. "Everyone, please stay calm," Officer Chen announced, his voice carrying authority but also compassion. "We need to hear from witnesses, but first, let's make sure the little girl is okay." He nodded to his partner, who approached Maya and her aunt while keeping one eye on Mr. Cole. The crowd's phones were still recording, capturing every moment. Parents who had witnessed the assault stepped forward, eager to give their statements. The teenage basketball players approached an officer, holding out their phones. "We got it all on video," one said, his voice still shaking with anger. Everything he said, everything he did. Mr. Cole's demeanor began to crack as he watched more police cars arrive. His face, which had been twisted with hatred just minutes before, now showed the first signs of fear. "She ran into me first," he called out, his voice less confident now. "I was defending myself." A collective gasp of disbelief rose from the crowd. "Defending yourself?" Lily's mother stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage. "She's an 8-year-old girl who accidentally bumped into you while playing frisbee." Others joined in, their voices rising in agreement. The paramedics arrived, the ambulance parking near the playground entrance. They made their way to Maya, medical bags in hand. The little girl sat quietly as they examined her cheek, her aunt holding her hand tightly. Despite her tears, Maya showed remarkable bravery, answering the paramedics' gentle questions with quiet dignity. Officer Chen approached Mr. Cole, who had begun to sweat visibly. "Sir, we need you to step over here," he said firmly. 2 other officers flanked him, their presence leaving no room for argument. The crowd watched intently as Mr. Cole was led away from the playground area, his earlier bravado completely gone. Maya's aunt remained on her phone, providing updates to Maya's father. The officers nearby couldn't hear her exact words, but they noticed her calm confidence as she spoke. She knew something they didn't, that their chief was already on his way. And this situation was about to take an unexpected turn. More people had gathered at the park's entrance, drawn by the commotion and emergency vehicles. Parents hugged their children close, using the moment to whisper quiet lessons about right and wrong, about standing up to hatred, about protecting those who need help. The paramedics finished their examination of Maya, confirming that while she would have some bruising, she hadn't suffered any serious physical injuries. The emotional wounds, however, would take longer to heal. Lily sat next to her friend, their hands clasped together, showing that friendship knows no color. A detective's unmarked car pulled up, and a plainclothes officer stepped out, notebook already in hand. The investigation was moving quickly, with officers gathering statements and collecting video evidence from multiple witnesses. Nobody wanted to leave until they were sure justice would be served. The sound of another vehicle approaching caught everyone's attention. This one was different, a black SUV moving with purpose through the park's entrance. The officers on scene straightened their postures unconsciously, recognizing the vehicle but not yet knowing its significance to the situation. Mr. Cole, now seated on a park bench with officers nearby, couldn't see who was about to arrive. He was too busy trying to explain away his actions, his excuses falling on unsympathetic ears. In just moments, he would come face to face with someone who would make him deeply regret his hateful choices. Time seemed to slow down as Mr. Cole's hand moved through the air. The peaceful morning shattered like glass as his palm struck Maya's cheek, the sound echoing across the suddenly silent playground. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The shock of witnessing such cruelty against a child froze everyone in place. Then, chaos erupted. Maya's cry broke the spell of silence. Her aunt pulled her close, shielding her from any further attacks while checking her face. The little girl's tears flowed freely now, not just from physical pain, but from the hurt of experiencing such senseless hatred for the first time in her young life. "Someone call 911. A woman shouted, her phone already in hand. Multiple voices joined in, some already speaking to emergency operators, others recording the incident. The air filled with the sounds of urgent voices and the beeping of phones dialing. The 2 teenage basketball players reacted instantly, stepping between Mr. Cole and Maya. Their faces showed a mix of anger and disbelief, but they maintained their composure, creating a human barrier. One boy's hands trembled as he held his phone up, recording everything, while the other kept his eyes fixed on Mr. Cole, ready to protect Maya if needed. "How dare you hit a child?" Lily's mother rushed forward, her voice shaking with rage. Other parents joined her, forming a protective circle around Maya and her aunt. The ice cream vendor abandoned his cart and hurried over, his usually cheerful face now stern with determination to help. Mr. Cole stood his ground, seemingly proud of what he'd done. She needed to learn her place, he spat out, his words causing another wave of gasps and angry responses from the crowd. He looked around defiantly, as if challenging anyone to confront him. A nearby father who had been playing with his toddler handed his child to his wife and approached Mr. Cole. "You just assaulted a little girl," he said, his voice low and controlled despite his obvious anger. "You're not going anywhere until the police arrive." Maya's aunt held her niece close, whispering words of comfort while pulling out her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed her brother-in-law's number, Maya's father, the police chief. She knew this situation was about to change dramatically. Little Maya, still crying softly, touched her cheek where Mr. Cole had struck her. The red mark stood out against her dark skin, a visible symbol of hatred that no child should ever have to bear. "Why does he hate me?" she asked her aunt through tears. "I said I was sorry." The question broke hearts across the playground. Parents held their own children tighter, many crying themselves at the innocence of Maya's words. Lily broke away from her mother and ran to her friend, hugging her fiercely, their friendship showing the absurdity of racial hatred. Mr. Cole paced back and forth like a caged animal, realizing the gravity of what he'd done but refusing to show remorse. "You're all witnesses," he shouted, trying to justify his actions. "She ran into me first." His words fell on deaf ears as the crowd's murmurs grew louder, their phones recording his every move. The distant sound of sirens began to cut through the tension. Mr. Cole's face showed the first flicker of concern as he realized the consequences of his actions were approaching quickly. He looked around, perhaps considering an escape, but the crowd had effectively surrounded him. Maya's aunt spoke quietly into her phone, her words carrying a weight that nobody else in the park yet understood. "He hit her. Please come quickly." "Yes," at her favorite park. She looked up at Mr. Cole with a knowing expression. He had no idea who was about to arrive. The playground had transformed from a place of joy to a scene of unity against hatred. Parents comforted their children while keeping watchful eyes on Mr. Cole. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and with each wail, Mr. Cole's defiant stance weakened slightly. Nobody in the park knew that this incident would soon become a turning point for their community. For now, they stood together, protecting a little girl who had done nothing wrong except exist in the same space as a man filled with hate. The sirens grew closer, and Justice was about to arrive wearing a police chief's badge. The purple frisbee sailed through the air, catching a gust of wind that carried it off course. Maya, focused on catching her friend's throw, ran backward with her arms outstretched, her yellow beads clicking together as she moved. She was so concentrated on the flying disc that she didn't notice how close she was getting to Mr. Cole's bench. The collision was gentle, just a small bump as Maya backed into the bench while tracking the frisbee. Most adults would have simply steadied the child and sent her on her way with a kind word. But Mr. Cole wasn't most adults. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, jumping to his feet. His sudden movement caused Maya to stumble backward, her small hands instinctively reaching out to catch her balance. The frisbee landed forgotten on the ground nearby, its gentle thud drowned out by Mr. Cole's rising voice. "I'm sorry," Maya said quickly, her voice small but clear, just as her parents had taught her. "I didn't see you there." Her eyes were wide with surprise at his angry reaction, but she remembered what her father always said about staying calm and polite, even when others weren't. But Mr. Cole wasn't interested in apologies. His face reddened as he looked down at the little girl, his eyes narrowing with an anger that went far beyond a simple accident in the park. "You people never watch where you're going," he spat out, his words carrying years of built-up prejudice. "Always running around like you own the place." Maya's aunt was already moving across the playground, her heart racing as she saw the confrontation unfolding. Other parents began to stand up too, sensing that this was more than just a minor incident. Lily stood frozen nearby, her hand covering her mouth in shock at the man's outburst. "I said I was sorry," Maya repeated, her voice trembling slightly now. She'd never encountered such anger directed at her before, and she couldn't understand why this man was so upset over an accident. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she stood her ground, remembering her father's lessons about dignity. Mr. Cole's tirade continued, his voice getting louder with each word. Parents quickly gathered their children, forming a protective circle around Maya. A young father stepped forward, placing himself between Maya and Mr. Cole. "That's enough," he said firmly. She apologized, "She's just a child." But Mr. Cole was beyond reason now, his face contorted with rage as he pointed his finger at Maya, unleashing a stream of hateful words that had no place in a children's park or anywhere else. Some parents covered their children's ears, while others pulled out their phones to record the incident, recognizing that this situation was spiraling out of control. Maya's aunt finally reached her niece, wrapping protective arms around the trembling child. "Come on, sweetie," she said softly, trying to guide Maya away from the situation. But Mr. Cole stepped forward, blocking their path, his presence looming over them like a dark shadow. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "I'm tired of people like you thinking you can just walk away after causing trouble." His words were slurred with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. The crowd gasped as he took another step forward, his intentions clearly threatening. Two teenage boys from the basketball court rushed over, positioning themselves near Maya and her aunt. Other adults moved closer too, their faces showing a mix of concern and determination. The park had become a stage for a confrontation between hatred and community, with an innocent child caught in the middle. Maya looked up at the angry man, her young mind trying to process why someone could be so full of hate. Through her tears, she spoke with a clarity that cut through the tension. "My daddy says hate only hurts the person holding it." Her words, innocent yet profound, seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, everyone stood still, the weight of a child's wisdom settling over the scene. But that moment of clarity was brief. Mr. Cole's face twisted into an even darker expression, and before anyone could react, he raised his hand. The peaceful morning was about to shatter completely, and no one in the park was prepared for what would happen next. The peaceful morning at Cherry Hill Park took an unsettling turn when a tall man in a wrinkled blue shirt stormed through the entrance. Mr. Cole, as the neighborhood unfortunately knew him, had a reputation that made parents uncomfortable and children confused. His heavy footsteps seemed to carry the weight of his anger, crushing the morning dew beneath his worn-out boots. The change in the park's atmosphere was instant, like clouds suddenly blocking the sun. Parents who had been relaxed on benches now sat up straighter, their eyes tracking Mr. Cole's movement across the playground. Some quietly called their children closer, trying not to cause alarm, but feeling that familiar instinct to protect. "This place isn't what it used to be," Mr. Cole muttered loudly enough for nearby families to hear, his words cutting through the playful chatter of children. He dropped himself onto a bench, arms crossed, glaring at the diverse group of families enjoying their weekend. His presence was like a stone thrown into a peaceful pond, sending ripples of discomfort through the previously harmonious scene. Maya and Lily continued their frisbee game, blissfully unaware of the tension building around them. Maya's aunt, however, felt her shoulders tense as she watched Mr. Cole's scowl deepen every time children's laughter reached his ears. She'd heard stories about him from other parents, how he'd complain about certain people moving into the neighborhood, how he'd make uncomfortable comments at community meetings. A young mother gathering her toddler's toys quickly moved to a different area when Mr. Cole began loudly commenting about maintaining the old standards of the neighborhood. Another family packing up their picnic basket decided their lunch would taste better at home. The playground's joyful symphony was slowly being muffled by an invisible blanket of unease. Two teenage boys who had been playing basketball nearby stopped their game, the ball tucked firmly under one boy's arm as they whispered to each other, shooting concerned glances in Mr. Cole's direction. They'd had run-ins with him before, times when his words had turned their innocent game into something they needed to defend. Maya's aunt considered gathering Maya and heading home, but she hesitated. Why should they let one person's hatred chase them away from their favorite place? She thought about what Maya's father, the police chief, always said about standing your ground peacefully and not letting intimidation win. Still, she moved closer to where the girls were playing, her protective instincts on high alert. A group of younger children who had been building a sandcastle in the playground's sandbox began to pack up their toys, their parents having decided that today's castle would remain unfinished. The kids didn't understand why they had to leave, but they felt the change in their parents' voices, the gentle urgency in their movements. Mr. Cole pulled out his phone, pretending to be busy while actually taking pictures of the park, something he'd later use at community meetings to complain about the changing times. His actions weren't illegal, but they carried the weight of implied threats that the adults in the park understood all too well. The ice cream vendor, who had been doing steady business on this warm day, slowly pushed his cart to a different area of the park, the cheerful tinkling of his bell now seeming out of place in the tense atmosphere. He'd seen Mr. Cole's type before and knew from experience that distance was the safest option. Maya and Lily's frisbee soared higher and higher as they played, their innocent joy a stark contrast to the growing darkness of Mr. Cole's presence. The purple frisbee traced arcs through the air, temporarily passing through the invisible barrier of tension that had descended over the park. The girls' laughter, once part of a joyful chorus, now stood out against the quieter background. The morning had transformed from a scene of community harmony into a subtle standoff between those who sought to spread joy and those who carried hatred in their hearts. Nobody knew that in just a few moments, this tension would explode into something much worse, something that would change their community forever. For now, they all held their breath, hoping that this unwelcome cloud would pass without a storm. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Cherry Hill Park as 8-year-old Maya skipped along the winding path, her pink backpack bouncing with each step. Her mom had packed her favorite snacks, apple slices and peanut butter crackers, perfect for a day of adventure at the playground. "Look how empty it is today," Maya called out excitedly to her aunt, who was babysitting while Maya's dad was handling some important work at the police station. Being the daughter of the city's first black police chief meant sometimes spending weekends with her loving aunt, who always made their park visits extra special. The playground was Maya's kingdom. She knew every corner, from the squeaky third swing that nobody else liked to use, but was actually the best one, to the perfect spot under the big oak tree where she could watch butterflies dance around the flowers. Her braids, decorated with bright yellow beads that matched her sunshine personality, clicked softly as she made her way to her favorite swing. "Auntie, watch how high I can go." Maya pumped her legs, something she'd finally mastered after weeks of practice. Her aunt sat on a nearby bench, smiling proudly while keeping a watchful eye on her niece. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of blooming spring flowers. Other families began arriving at the park, and soon the playground was filled with the joyful sounds of children playing. Maya loved these moments, watching younger kids tobble across the rubber matting, hearing parents chat about weekend plans, and feeling like she was part of this big, happy community. She spotted her best friend from school, Lily, arriving with her mom. The two girls had been inseparable since kindergarten, never caring about their different skin colors because they both shared the same favorite color, purple, and both agreed that math was the best subject in school. "Maya." Lily waved enthusiastically, her unicorn shirt glittering in the sunlight. "Want to play frisbee? I got a new one that lights up." Maya jumped off her swing with the grace of someone who'd done it hundreds of times before, her feet landing perfectly on the ground. She looked at her aunt for permission, receiving a warm nod in response. The girls ran to an open grassy area, their laughter mixing with the cheerful chaos of the playground. The park had always been a safe haven, a place where Maya felt free to just be a kid. She didn't know that this perfect Saturday morning was about to change dramatically, that her innocent world was about to collide with something darker. For now, she was simply a happy 8-year-old tossing a frisbee with her best friend, her heart as light as the spring breeze that carried their giggles across the park. Other children started joining their game, turning it into an impromptu playdate. Maya and Lily welcomed everyone, teaching the younger kids how to throw the frisbee properly. Maya had learned from her dad that being kind and including others was what made a community strong. She loved how he always said, "A leader's job is to make everyone feel safe and welcome." The morning continued to unfold like a beautiful story, with parents taking photos of their children playing, dogs walking by with their owners, and the ice cream cart's bell chiming in the distance. Nobody at the park could have guessed that this peaceful scene was about to be shattered, least of all the little girl in yellow beads who was having the time of her life.